All right, so today we're going to be diving deep into the world of fasting, specifically its connection to spirituality.
Okay.
Our main source for this deep dive is called Why Fasting Attracts God. 2 things you should never do while fasting.
Interesting.
And, well, it's a pretty bold title,
Yes.
but it promises some really fascinating insights.
I'm curious to see what it has to say.
Me too.
Okay.
So let's just jump right in. So what struck me right away is how the source intertwines like the physical act of fasting with the spiritual motivations.
Yeah. It's not just about like skipping a meal or something.
Right.
It's about like consciously shifting your focus.
From the physical to the spiritual.
Yeah, exactly. Like from worldly desires to something deeper.
It's almost like you're hitting the pause button on the physical world so you can tune into something bigger.
That's a great way to put it.
So, I mean, the source really emphasizes this idea that you're choosing spiritual hunger over physical satisfaction.
Right. And that act of choosing is what's key.
Yeah, like it's a demonstration of your commitment to God.
Like saying my relationship with my faith is more important than this meal.
Which, in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with temptations,
Right.
that's a pretty bold statement.
It is.
And the source even goes so far as to say that this demonstration actually attracts God's attention.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting.
So why do you think that is?
Well, the source dives into this whole theological idea
Okay.
that when we deny our physical needs for a spiritual purpose,
Mm-hmm.
we create space for God to move.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's about humbling ourselves
Okay.
and acknowledging our dependence on something greater than ourselves.
So it's not about manipulating God or trying to earn favors.
No, not at all.
It's about creating an environment of openness and receptivity
Twitch
to allow God to work in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the source uses some pretty interesting examples from the Bible to illustrate this concept.
Right.
One that stood out to me was the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. I remember learning about that. But I thought it was only the high priest who fasted on that day.
Actually, the source points out that everyone fasted,
Really?
not just the high priest.
So it wasn't just him making atonement for the people's sins.
Right. It was a collective act
Wow.
of identifying with the priest's sacrifice.
So it was more about communal solidarity than individual piety?
Exactly. It was about unifying the community in a shared spiritual experience.
That adds a whole new dimension to it.
It does.
It's not just about personal piety, it's about something much bigger.
Right.
And the source also highlights how Jesus himself viewed fasting.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't say if you fast, but when you fast.
Right. Implying that it was a regular practice for his disciples.
Which is a pretty strong endorsement coming from Jesus.
It is.
But I can imagine some people listening might have some reservations about trying it.
Oh, sure.
I mean, let's be honest, giving up food can be tough.
Yeah. It's not always easy.
So what does the source say to people who might be feeling a little anxious about the idea of fasting?
Well, it actually addresses those concerns head on.
Okay.
Like, will I be super hungry? Or will people think I'm weird?
Which are very valid concerns.
They are.
So what's the source's advice for dealing with those anxieties?
It all comes down to shifting your focus.
Okay.
It's not about the physical discomfort
Right.
or what other people think.
It's about the spiritual goal.
Exactly. You're reminding yourself why you're fasting in the first place.
It's about the internal transformation, not the external appearance.
Precisely.
And that leads to another really important point the source makes.
What's that?
Fasting is not dieting.
Yeah.
It's not about losing weight or following some trendy health fad.
It's a spiritual practice.
With deep historical and theological roots.
Exactly. So it's crucial to approach it with the right mindset.
Right.
It's about deepening your connection to God, not shrinking your waistline.
I think that's a really important distinction.
It is.
Now, when it comes to the actual practice of fasting,
Yes.
the source gets into different types of fasts,
Right.
each with its own purpose and level of intensity.
It can seem a little overwhelming at first.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
There is, but we can break it down.
All right, let's do that.
Right.
I'm particularly curious about this one called the absolute fast.
Ah, yes.
It sounds pretty intense.
Well, it is.
What exactly does it involve?
It involves abstaining from both food and water.
Wow.
So yeah, not for beginners.
Definitely not.
And it's typically only undertaken in extreme circumstances.
Or for very specific spiritual purposes.
Right.
I imagine it requires a lot of preparation and guidance.
Absolutely. You'd want to consult with your spiritual advisor or a healthcare professional before attempting something like that.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Now, the source also mentioned what it calls a normal fast. And this seems to be the one that's most commonly referenced in the Bible.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little more about that one?
Sure. So a normal fast involves abstaining from all food, but you can still drink liquids.
Okay, so just water.
Water, juice, things like that.
And this is the kind of fast that a lot of biblical figures practiced.
Yeah. Often for extended periods.
As they sought guidance or clarity.
Or a closer connection with God.
So it's about creating a space of physical emptiness to be filled with spiritual nourishment.
I like that.
That's a powerful image.
It is.
And then you have partial fasts.
Right.
Which offer more flexibility.
And a more targeted approach.
So like choosing to give up certain types of food or drinks.
Exactly.
For example, the source mentioned the Daniel fast,
Yeah.
which involves consuming only vegetables and water.
For a set period of time.
It's kind of like a modern day cleanse.
With this spiritual twist.
Right.
It's interesting how these ancient practices can resonate with contemporary wellness trends.
It speaks to the enduring human desire to connect with something beyond ourselves.
Absolutely.
Whether it's through ancient rituals or modern practices.
We're always seeking that deeper connection.
Okay, so we've got the absolute fast, the normal fast, and the partial fast. The source also mentioned something called John Wesley's fast.
Oh, yeah.
What's that one all about?
That one centers around consuming only whole grain bread and water.
Interesting.
So another type of partial fast.
But with historical roots.
Right.
It seems like these specific fasts, like the Daniel fast and John Wesley's fast, are really rooted in tradition and personal practice.
They are. And they were inspired by biblical figures who use fasting to fuel their spiritual work.
And deepen their connection to God.
Exactly.
It's inspiring to see how fasting has been woven into the fabric of different spiritual traditions throughout history.
It's like a thread that connects us to those who came before us.
All seeking the same kind of spiritual awakening.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Now, beyond the specific foods you choose to restrict or give up, the source really emphasizes the importance of intentionality.
Right. It's not just about going through the motions.
It's about aligning your actions with your spiritual goals.
Exactly. Right. It's not just about going through the motions.
So why do you think the source places so much emphasis on having like a clear purpose for your fast?
Well, it seems to be cautioning against just fasting for the sake of fasting.
Like it's not some kind of endurance test.
Exactly. It's not about seeing how long you can go without food.
It's about something deeper.
Right. It encourages you to think about what you want to achieve through fasting.
What's your spiritual goal?
Yeah. What are you hoping to get out of this experience?
It's kind of like setting an intention before you meditate.
That's a good analogy.
It helps you focus your energy.
Right. And direct your efforts towards a specific outcome.
And the source even suggests like actually writing down your reasons for fasting.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So you have that tangible reminder.
Yeah, when things get tough.
Or you start to question why you're even doing this.
Right. It's like having a roadmap for your spiritual journey.
Okay, so the source gives some examples of purposes people might have for fasting, like praying for a specific outcome,
right,
seeking guidance for a major decision, or just desiring a deeper connection with God.
Yeah, those are all great examples.
It's really interesting how fasting can be used to address such a wide range of spiritual needs.
It is.
But let's go back to this idea of intentionality for a second.
Okay.
How does that play out in the actual practice of fasting?
Well, it definitely influences the type of fast you choose and how you approach it.
The source makes it clear that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to fasting.
Right. It's not a rigid set of rules.
It's a flexible practice
that can be adapted to your individual needs and circumstances.
So it's about finding the approach that works best for you.
And that resonates most deeply with you.
And supports your specific spiritual goals.
Precisely.
So how do you even go about figuring that out?
Well, the source suggests considering a few factors.
Like what?
Like your experience with fasting, the intensity of your spiritual goal, and any practical limitations you might have.
So it's about being realistic.
Exactly.
It's like tailoring a workout plan to your fitness level.
That's a good way to think about it.
You wouldn't jump into an advanced routine if you were just starting out.
Right.
So for someone who's new to fasting, what would you recommend?
Well, the source suggests starting with a simple one-day fast.
Okay.
Like the Yom Kippur fast we talked about earlier.
Just to kind of get your feet wet.
Exactly, just to get a feel for it.
Baby steps are encouraged.
Definitely the source emphasizes that even a short fast can be a powerful experience.
It's not about the duration.
It's about the sincerity of your heart.
And your willingness to step outside your comfort zone.
Right.
So I imagine the source would also advise choosing a method that you feel comfortable with.
Absolutely, both physically and emotionally.
It's not about pushing yourself to the point of exhaustion or distress.
Right. It's about finding a balance.
That honors both your body and your spirit. So let's say someone has decided to try fasting.
Okay.
They've chosen a purpose. They've picked a type of fast that suits their needs.
Right.
And they're ready to take the plunge.
Okay.
What other advice does the source offer for setting themselves up for success?
Planning is crucial.
Okay.
It's not about just winging it.
Right.
Think about your schedule.
Okay.
Any upcoming events and any potential challenges you might face.
So you're not setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. It's about being realistic and making conscious choices
That support your fasting goals.
while also honoring your other commitments and responsibilities.
So for example, if you know you have a busy week coming up
Mm-hmm.
with lots of social gatherings,
Right.
maybe a full fast isn't the best choice.
That's a good point.
You got to be practical about it.
You do.
Now, the source also uses this phrase, afflicting oneself,
Yeah.
which seemed a little harsh to me at first.
I know what you mean.
Can you explain what that means in the context of fasting?
Sure. So that phrase often comes from the Old Testament context of fasting.
Okay.
And while it might sound a bit severe,
Yeah.
the source explains that it's not about punishing yourself.
It's not about self-flagellation.
No, it's more about embracing simplicity and humility.
It's a deliberate choice to let go of excess and comfort.
That's a good way to put it.
So it's less about deprivation and more about simplifying your life.
Exactly.
The source even suggests that the types of liquids you consume during a fast can reflect this principle.
Right, like cutting out pleasurable drinks like soda.
And focusing on simpler options like water.
Exactly.
That's like a symbolic act of letting go of luxury.
And embracing a more basic way of being.
I like that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about those different types of fasts.
Okay.
We've already talked about the absolute fast,
Mm-hmm.
which is definitely the most extreme.
Right.
But the normal fast seems to be the most common and accessible.
Yeah. For most people.
So just to recap, the normal fast is about abstaining from solid food while still allowing liquids.
Right.
And the source points to numerous examples in the Bible where people fasted this way for extended periods.
Often retreating to quiet places to focus on prayer and spiritual reflection.
It's about removing those distractions
The food and the routines of daily life.
to create space for a deeper connection with God.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And then we have the partial fast,
Right.
which offers even more flexibility in terms of what you restrict.
Yes.
We already touched on the Daniel fast, which is all about fruits, vegetables, and water.
Right.
It's kind of like a plant-based cleanse with a spiritual intention.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it.
And then there's John Wesley's fast,
Mm-hmm.
which is centered around whole grain bread and water.
That's right.
So both the Daniel fast and John Wesley's fast were inspired by biblical figures who used fasting to fuel their spiritual work.
And deepen their connection to God.
It's inspiring to see how these ancient practices can resonate with contemporary wellness trends.
Yeah, it speaks to the enduring power of these traditions.
Like a common thread that connects us to those who came before us.
Seeking the same kind of spiritual awakening.
That's a beautiful thought.
I think it underscores the timelessness of this practice.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I find most intriguing about the source
Yeah.
is this idea of fasting with a companion.
Oh, yeah. That caught my attention too.
It suggests that there's something really powerful about sharing the fasting experience with someone else.
It's like having a workout buddy for your spirit.
I love that analogy.
Someone to support you, encourage you, and celebrate your victories with.
Exactly. And the source actually cites biblical verses
Really?
that suggest there's a special kind of spiritual synergy
Okay.
when people pray and fast together in agreement.
So it's like amplifying the spiritual energy through shared intention.
That's a powerful concept.
It is.
And beyond the spiritual benefits, having a fasting buddy can also provide practical support.
Oh, sure.
You can encourage each other to share tips for dealing with cravings.
And help each other stay on track.
Exactly. It's like having a teammate on your spiritual journey.
Now, even if you don't have a designated fasting buddy, the source emphasizes the importance of seeking support from your spiritual community.
Absolutely.
Talk to your pastor, a spiritual mentor.
Or fellow members of your faith,
It can be really helpful during a fast
especially when you're facing the emotional and mental challenges.
because it's not just about the physical hunger.
Right, the mental and emotional hurdles can be just as tough.
So it's a reminder that we don't have to go through this alone.
Exactly. There's a whole community of support available to us.
If we're willing to reach out.
Right.
Now, the source acknowledges that fasting can be difficult,
Mm-hmm.
both physically and mentally.
It's not easy.
So it encourages a mindset of perseverance.
And reliance on God's grace.
So it's not about willpower.
It's about leaning on your faith for strength and guidance.
Recognizing your own limitations.
And surrendering to something greater than yourself.
That's a really important point.
It is.
And ultimately, the source reminds us that the true reward of fasting isn't about bragging rights or self-congratulation.
No, it's not about checking off a box on your spiritual to-do list.
It's about the internal transformation.
That occurs when we surrender our physical desires.
To pursue a deeper connection with the divine.
Exactly.
So it's less about, proving something to ourselves.
Right.
And more about opening ourselves up to something greater.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
It's not about willpower or deprivation.
It's about receptivity and transformation.
You know, as we've been talking about all this, I keep thinking about how countercultural fasting is in today's world.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I mean, we live in a culture of instant gratification and constant stimulation.
Right. Everything is so fast-paced.
And fasting seems to go against all of that.
It does. It's like a pushback against those cultural currents.
Yeah, it's about creating space for stillness and reflection.
And connecting with something beyond the material world.
So for someone listening who's maybe intrigued by this idea of fasting, where would you suggest they start?
Well, I'd encourage them to think about their motivations first.
Okay.
Like, what are they hoping to gain from this experience?
Right, what are their goals?
Yeah, what spiritual goals are they trying to achieve?
And once they have a clear sense of purpose,
Then they can start exploring the different types of fasts.
and find one that resonates with their needs and their lifestyle.
Exactly. And the source we've been discussing offers a lot of information on all of that.
It's like a comprehensive guide to incorporating fasting into your spiritual practice.
It is. And it's important to remember that fasting is a journey.
Okay.
It's not a destination.
It's a practice that can be deepened over time.
Right.
So even if someone has tried fasting before and maybe didn't have a great experience,
They can always approach it again with fresh eyes.
yeah, and a new perspective.
Absolutely. And that's one of the beautiful things about spiritual practices like fasting.
They're not meant to be rigid or one size fits all.
Right. They're invitations to explore,
An experiment.
to discover what works best for you on your own unique path.
I like that. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm struck by how fasting, in a way, mirrors the rhythms of nature.
Oh, I like that.
There are seasons of abundance and seasons of scarcity,
Right.
times to feast and times to fast.
And by embracing those rhythms in our own lives,
We can connect with something larger than ourselves,
it's a beautiful thought and a great reminder that fasting is not just an ancient practice.
but a timeless principle,
That can help us navigate the complexities of modern life.
and find a deeper connection with our faith, ourselves, and the world around us.
Exactly.